We
are
We
cultivate.
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 We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel.
Hello.
Hi. It's been forever.
It's been 2 hours.
Couple hours since we've last seen each
Couple
other.
hours since. It's nice being so close.
Yeah. So I have one thing to note before we, two things to note before we kind of dive in to today's story. So the first is, I want to do a big shout out and thank you to our newest sustainer over on Buy Me a Coffee, Sarah from Wisconsin.
Hey, thank you, Sarah from Wisconsin. Wow.
She had a really nice thing to say, so let me pull up the page. She said, "As a Wisconsinite, I appreciate the upper Midwestern kindness brought to your cases. It's a good addition to my true crime and history rotation."
Oh, thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
We're sometimes nice. We try.
Yeah. And the second thing I wanted to note is that today's episode topic was actually suggested by another one of our sustainers, Elizabeth.
Hey, thanks, Elizabeth.
Carrie Ann outdid herself again. There is a host of sources this week.
Amazing. Thank you, Carrie Ann. Wow, so much support for this episode. I'm feeling all the warm fuzzies for this episode.
I feel like I should be doing like the PBS thing, like, this show wouldn't be here without the support of people like you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Insert Viking Cruises ads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here.
All right. So this week, we are going to be discussing Sir Richard Francis Burton.
Could go either way. Just because he has a fancy name doesn't mean he's a good person.
We'll go into it. Okay.
Oh, no.
Information was pulled from the following sources: a 2020 Discover Silversea article by Carolyn Spencer Brown, 2018 Borg's Desire and Sex, Chapter 4, Sir Richard Burton's Orientalist Erotica, 2018 The Romance of Lady Isabel Burton by Isabel Burton, 2018 Unexplained Mysteries article by T.K. Randall, 2015 FT Magazine Oxford article by Jeremy Paxman, 2011 International League of Antiquarian Booksellers article by Raymond John Haugigo, one of those.
All right.
1890 Athenaeum article, one of those. An 1890 Morning Post article, BBC History article, The Book of Burtoniana by Gavin Trudeau, Britannica, Captain Sir Richard Francis Burton Museum article, First Footsteps in East Africa, or An Exploration of Harar by Richard Burton, Find a Grave, Genie.com, Habitats and Heritage article, The Highly Civilized Man, Richard Burton and the Victorian World by Dane Kennedy, House History article, The Casada of Haji Abdu el Yazdi by Richard F. Burton, The Life of Sir Richard Burton by Thomas Wright, Princeton Library article, and finally, Wikipedia.
Wow.
Very thorough.
Very thorough.
Thank you again to Carrie Ann for her research assistance for this episode, and links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes. We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Ye Olde Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
Sir Richard Francis Burton was born on March 19th, 1821 in Torquay, Devon, England, the son of parents Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Netterville Burton and Martha Baker Burton.
Very fancy.
He was the eldest of 3 children, including his younger sister Maria Catherine Elizabeth, born in 1823, and brother Edward Joseph Netterville Burton, who was born in 1824.
They just really loved names. Can't have more. Like the limit doesn't exist in this family.
Yep.
I feel like
you can have as many names as you want. I'm just gonna keep adding them.
Because this was before the time of ITBS, where you wouldn't have to use a square and run out of squares for your name.
I remember those days.
When filling it out. I imagine this family would be very curmudgeon-y if they had to do such a thing now.
That's probably how all of the abbreviations of names came about, as they were like, well, I can't write all my names, so I guess I'm just going to be Richard, right. What is it? R.F. Burton, because I can't fit all my names on here, but whatever, it's fine. Richard grew up in both France and Italy before he returned to England for college, where he enrolled at Trinity College, Oxford, to prepare for a career as a clergyman. Honest work if you can get it.
Kind of a pretty standard path, I would say.
Growing up and even into adulthood, Richard surpassed expectations. By the time he was 14, it was said he could play chess blindfolded. He was also at that time a skilled fencer.
Successfully, or did he just do it?
I feel like this is the queen. This one is a bishop. By the time he enrolled in college, even though he had ended his music lessons by smashing his violin over his music teacher's head,
a choice.
He'd also learned how to box, drink, and, quote, find his way around a brothel, end quote.
All right, so the last 2 professions are deviating from, the standard bit, I suppose.
Richard was known for getting into fights, and it became something he would receive nicknames for later in life, such as Ruffian Dick.
Not just, you're such a dick.
Yep, you're a ruffian dick. Examples of this included when he challenged an undergraduate who made fun of his droopy mustache to a duel. Droopy mustache.
I love that they had the audacity to call it a droopy mustache.
The balls on that kid. He was also known to be frequently in debt to his tailor, attended horse races, and he also hosted rowdy parties. So a bit of a rabble-rouser.
Liked a good fight club. Like your typical nobleman.
And this is why he was expelled from Oxford in 1842 for violating the rules of the college, specifically the fact that he attended a horse race. He was betting on the ponies, and they were like, no, sir.
Can't do that and become a clergyman. Sorry.
Bye-bye.
Jesus said no to that.
I like ponies. Don't put money on the ponies.
He's like, let the ponies go.
Let them run wild and free. By the time that he started college, Richard was already fluent in French, Italian, Greek, and Latin.
Bragging much?
Right. Well, it gets more braggy. And instead of pursuing higher education after he was expelled, after debating between the Austrian army, the Swiss Guards, and the French Foreign Legion, he made the choice to enlist as a British officer in the 18th Bombay Native Infantry, where he was sent to Gujarat, India.
Oh, so he is a bad person. Oh, no. Oh, no. Nothing. Being British in India, nothing super great came from that combination.
After arriving in Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai, on October 28, 1842, he fully embraced the Hindu culture, making him a bit of an outcast amongst his fellow officers.
Okay.
Fun fact, Richard would go on to become fluent in 29 languages and dialects from European, Asian, and African nations, including Gujarati, Punjabi, and Marathi.
Okay. So he's trying to understand the indigenous folks. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
But still, Like the ruling class, you know, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While in India, his boss was General Sir Charles Napier, who was famously opposed to the practice of sati, where widows were burnt alive on the funeral pyres of their husbands. Which is
That's
good.
great. Yeah,
That's
thanks for
awesome.
that. Yeah, let's not force people to do that.
Yep. Given Richard's linguistic skills, General Napier used him as a bit of an intelligence officer, having him look into cases of infanticide and male prostitution in addition to further researching sati. He was like, I don't want to come in and be like, stop killing yourselves, but also stop killing yourselves. Like, he was trying to figure out what the cultural significance of that was, so he could be like, can you not do that anymore?
Yeah. If he could be like, hey, if you're not comfortable dying right now, you don't have to. You have a choice.
Yeah.
You don't have to be forced to die.
This wasn't confirmed, but it's believed that Richard himself offered his services at a male brothel in Karachi to verify the claims of male prostitution, but the final report on the matter was suppressed, mainly because he was using a bunch of language that the Victorians of the time were like, that's too spicy. You're talking about little boys and men and homoerotic acts. That is too spicy.
Yeah.
So, by the age of 32, Richard had become quite the master of disguises. He seamlessly integrated into Indian society by growing his hair shoulder length, cultivated a luxurious beard, and dyed his hands, arms, and feet with a thin coating of henna.
Okay.
Ye old almost blackface.
It's brown face, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It's for knowledge, but still.
But still, yeah. Would not fly today.
No.
Back then, whatever.
Back then, it would, whether you liked it or not, unfortunately.
Yeah. Richard utilized the moniker of Mirza Abdullah, an Arab Persian trader from the Gulf, in order to gain entry to rich men's homes, harems, bazaars, mosques, and opium dens. Okay. So he cultivated this persona that was part Arab and part Persian. So on the off chance he did mistranslate or misspeak a little bit within those two languages, he could kind of play it off like,
oh, but I'm just an outsider.
Yeah, or so. I'm part Persian, so or whatever. Like he could use it as kind of like a catch-all. He briefly returned to England, and when his family moved to Boulogne, France, he met his future wife, Isabelle Arundel.
Oh.
Sounds like from Frozen.
I know, like she's just this lovely little fancy lady.
In 1852, after spending 10 years serving Her Majesty in India, he made a proposal to the Royal Geographical Society to take part in Hajj, or the Muslim pilgrimage to Medina and Mecca. After researching and learning about Islam, Richard shaved his head, grew an impressive beard, and became Sheikh Abdullah, a Sufi with an almost encyclopedic knowledge of magic and medicine.
I'm sorry. I know that this was probably super critical for white people to learn about these different cultures at the time, but this just sounds like a sitcom off the USA Channel.
Setting out for the Suez Desert via camel from Cairo, he became the first Christian Englishman to reach Medina after a sea voyage and harrowing escape from marauding Bedouin. Of this time, he later remarked, quote, "There are few better tests than an 80-mile ride in midsummer on a bad wooden saddle borne by a worse dromedary across the Suez Desert," end quote.
Oh, you mean it sucks? Yeah, we know.
You mean that was bad? Yeah. It's hot and dry.
Yeah, way to go in the summer.
In 1853, after several weeks in the second holiest site in Islam, Richard joined a caravan, arriving at Mecca on September 11th, 1853. Had he been discovered, he would have immediately been put to death.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, It's a sacred site.
Mm-hmm. During this point in history, the quote-unquote Dark Continent was being explored and portioned off by many European nations. This
Oh,
part
I'm
belongs to
sure.
us. This part belongs to us.
Just like everything else. We
Yep.
like this part.
Yep,
I
yep,
like
yep, yep.
this river.
Yep.
Mine.
It was in 1854 that Richard was given the opportunity to take an expedition to Somaliland, where Somali warriors were said to be in the habit of chopping off men's penises and hanging them from their arms as war trophies.
Oh, all right.
It's a fashion
Yeah,
choice.
it's a choice.
During this expedition, Richard was given the task of finding the fortress in the holy city of Harar in the Horn of Africa, which was a center for the slave trade. Locals believed that their lives as they knew them would end forever if a Christian set foot inside its walls.
Man.
Richard was able to use his mastery of disguise to present himself as a Turkish merchant, and after forging a letter that presented him as a British envoy, he was able to convince the Muslim ruler of the city to let him stay for 10 days.
Wow. But he was still deceiving him. So,
It was all a lie. Like, it was very obvious.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Y-
mean.
God, this guy must have just like no, what is it, your lymphatic system? Like he's just constantly high adrenaline level.
Yep. In 1855, Richard visited the ancient Somali port of Berbera, where he attempted to find the source of the Nile River, but the caravan he was a part of was attacked by around 200 Somali warriors. It was during this skirmish that one of his fellow explorers was killed, and he received a terrifying facial injury when a spear went through one side of his face and came out the other.
Ooh, that would have been a big hole too.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that is one way to pierce your face.
Yep. His friend John Hanning's Speak was stabbed in one shoulder and both thighs, but was able to escape with his life.
Incredible. Especially with like sanitary practices and like stitching people up at the time. That's impressive that they are able to recover.
Yeah, so Richard was 34 at the time that this happened, and he, after that, had like 2 really prominent facial scars on his face from where the spear
Yeah,
went through.
probably just intense looking dimples.
Mm-hmm. Richard returned to London, where he recovered. After convalescing for a while, he once more answered the call of adventure when he traveled to Constantinople, fighting briefly in the Crimea War after he was appointed the chief of staff of the Central India Horse, which has also been known as 21st King George V's own horse and Beatson's horse. It was a cavalry regiment of the British Indian Army and still exists to this day as part of the Indian Army Armored Corps.
Hmm.
So that's kind of cool.
I love that it's just like the cavalry is just a horse.
Yeah, they're just like, we're going to name this after King George V's horse. This
Yep.
is his cavalry.
This is his cavalry. It's just so many men.
Yep. And
We
one horse.
represent this horse. He was a great horse. Oh
They just clip clop into battle. Clip clop, clip clop, clip clop.
my gosh. They all have coconuts.
They do. The Royal Geographical Society funded Richard's expedition in 1856 to the lake regions of Central Africa in search of the source of the White Nile River. He was joined by John, who he had traveled with during the Somaliland expedition, the one who was stabbed in the shoulder
Yep.
and in the thighs. The men arrived at Zanzibar Island on December 20th, 1856. 6 months later, having gained the favor of the Sultan of Zanzibar, the duo set off with a group of 132 porters that carried with them bolts of cloth, beads, and spools of wire to trade with the local tribes, like as gifts.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So this doesn't factor in the tents, bedding, guns, scientific equipment, knives, brandy, and snuff, as well as 2,000 fish hooks that they also carried with them.
Carrying the fish hooks would be so dangerous.
I just picture like one guy with a giant vest covered in fish hooks.
Right. Like he's the punk. He's the edgy one, literally. He has all
Oh,
the
you want a
edges.
hook? I got you covered. I only got 2,000 that I'm wearing right now.
Like they go to this small tribe and they're like, sorry, we're not interested in anything you have. And he's like, but what about these?
Opens his trench coat that's just covered in fish hooks. That would hurt so bad if that got caught on your skin.
I can't imagine.
Oh my God.
I don't
That
want to
hurts.
imagine.
That would hurt so bad. The trip took a physical toll on both men, as one day's journey may only amount to covering 10 miles of terrain.
Yeah, I mean, you're carrying so much stuff, you have so many people, and it's hard. It's heavy, like your animals can't sustain.
Fun fact, part of Richard's scientific research was literally measuring the dicks of the African men they encountered during their travels.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that either.
For
Victorian people
science.
were so weird.
Yeah.
So weird and so invasive.
Mm-hmm. They also became very ill. They were hallucinating and going nearly blind from malaria and other diseases. In fact, at one point, a beetle had crawled inside one of John's ears while he was sleeping, and in an attempt to dig it out with his pocket knife, he actually
Oh my God.
deafened himself in that ear.
That's horrific.
Yeah. After a 3-month journey, the men quote-unquote discovered Lake Tanganyika in February of 1858. By the time they had arrived, Richard's surveying equipment was long gone or beyond repair. Even
Yeah.
so, Richard was convinced that they had discovered the source of the Nile River, until a group of locals told the men that another huge expanse of water was several weeks' journey to the north. They were like, yeah, this
Oh
is big.
no.
This is big,
But
but
let me tell you.
there's something bigger just up there.
And what was the fascination with finding the source of the Nile?
Because no one had discovered it yet. This point in history was all
Just
about
'cause?
discovery. Like, this is the time when being an explorer and adventurer was the coolest profession you could ever have. Like, you factor in like people trying to find the Arctic Pass and like
Yeah.
all those other things. Like, that's the height of this area, this section of the Victorian era.
That was the hipster career.
John continued on as Richard stayed back to rest. He was much too ill to attempt such a long journey.
Yeah, I bet.
John was able to make it to Lake Victoria, which he believed to be the true source of the Nile River, even though he was unable to survey the lake itself. The pair
Okay.
reunited and returned to Zanzibar, where they agreed to present their findings to the Royal Geographical Society together.
Okay.
To be like, we found it!
We did it! High five.
However, during the journey home via sea, the men's relationship began to deteriorate to the point that John took a separate ship home bound for London.
That's really funny. Like, I don't even want to sit with you anymore.
Yep, I'm going to take a completely separate ship.
I'm getting off this boat and I'm bringing my own boat home.
Upon his return, John announced that he had discovered the source of the Great Nile River.
You petty, petty man.
As you can imagine, Richard was beyond pissed when he arrived back in England 12 days later, and the pair were to announce their findings in a public debate organized by the British Association for the Advancement of Science in Bath in September of 1864. So, like, later that
Oh my
year, they
gosh.
wanted to have, like, a public debate on who was right and who had actually discovered it.
Does John forget that, like, Dick loved to fight?
Right?
Like, his entire life?
Bitch, I had a spear go through my face. Like,
yeah, like, I will cut you.
Like, yeah, you got stabbed in the thighs, but through the face.
Yeah, I got some fish hooks left, buddy. Come here.
They call me Fishhook Dick. That's weird. Anyway, interestingly, the day before they were set to speak, John was shooting partridges at his uncle's estate. And around 4 p.m., he was seen atop a wall when a shot rang out and he collapsed. After others rushed to his aid, it was discovered that he had sustained a terrible wound to his chest, and by the time the doctor arrived, he was already dead.
Yeah.
And birdshot goes everywhere. Like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's meant to scatter to try to get them.
Many viewed it as a horrible
People would
accident,
die.
but it's hard to know for sure.
Oh no, he was for sure murdered. There's no way.
Well,
He survived all those expeditions and that battle with him, and he just accidentally shoots himself in the chest when he's home
yeah.
shooting partridges. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
When Richard learned of John's passing, he was heard saying, quote, "By God, he's killed himself," end quote. And many people actually do believe that John had completed
He might
suicide,
have.
which is possible.
If you think about it too, if he was just so eaten up about lying about that, or like having it be uncovered, just dealing with Richard after the fact, who knows? Who knows? The dude was through a lot, so his
Yeah.
headspace could have been literally anywhere at that point.
Yeah. Richard married Lady Isabel Arundel on January 22nd, 1861. At the time of their marriage, Richard was 40 and Isabel was 30.
Not the worst age gap we've heard of.
Yeah. And they had been exchanging letters and meeting on occasion since their initial meeting in 1852.
Cute. So she's just been fantasizing about her like adventurous man this whole time.
Yeah.
And he's fantasizing about this like lovely lady waiting for him at home.
Yeah. Isabel was the daughter of Henry Raymond Arundel and Eliza, born on March 20th, 1831. She was the eldest daughter of their 11 children.
Yeah. Yeah, because Eliza, one name, she doesn't need to prove herself. She only needs one name.
It's like,
Look at her birth all those children.
it's like, I'm motherfucking Eliza.
She's like, you know what we don't need? More than one.
Yep.
Except for when it comes to children. In that case, I need at least 35.
In that case, I need all of the children.
I need a dozen.
Her father was a wine merchant, and Isabel was from an old Catholic aristocratic family. She was also the grandniece of the 9th Baron Arundel of Wardour Castle. Fancy AF.
Very fancy.
The pair married against her mother's wishes and would not have any children.
That is crazy.
Scandalous. Scandalous.
Super scandalous, especially if they were like such a prominent Catholic family too.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole thing is like continue
Yep.
continue your line, your religion.
Isabel was deeply in love with Richard, and she learned to fence so she could, quote, "defend Richard when he and I are attacked in the wilderness together," end quote.
Cute. She's a book talk girly.
She is.
She was writing her own fan fiction about her.
Totally was.
Her adventurous man.
And bucking against traditional Victorian norms, she also learned how to tend to livestock, as well as strip and reassemble guns in order to be able to spend time with her beloved.
Yeah, why not? You go, girl.
Over the course of the next 4 years of their marriage, she only saw her husband when he returned to England or during their numerous holidays to the Canary Islands, Brazil, Damascus, Trieste, and Egypt. So otherwise, like, she was home and he was off adventuring.
Yeah, she's a military wife.
Essentially, yeah. In 1861, deciding that a regular job may be a better match for a married man, he was appointed as the British consul at Fernando Po in the Gulf of Guinea. During his time there, he spent the bulk of it exploring the West African coast, as well as taking a trip up the Congo River to the Yalala Falls. One place he visited was Dahomey to see for himself their famous military formation, the Dahomey Amazons.
Oh.
Which he found to be disappointing.
I'm so sorry, but like as somebody like him to say that, it's just like I've seen so much. This is nothing. Like, shut up.
To be fair, during this time, he was ingesting about a half bottle of port every day.
Yeah, he probably was threatened by how great they were, and he was like, "No, like in my day, it would have been more impressive. Had I still had my whole face."
In 1865, Richard was appointed the consul at Santos in Brazil, which allowed him to traverse Brazil's Central Highlands and canoe down the São Francisco River from Paulo Afonso Falls. While there, he spent most of his time writing travel logs and cataloging his adventures.
Yeah.
3 years later, in 1868, Richard was appointed the British consul at Damascus. While there, Isabel became good friends with Jane Digby, while Richard became friends with Charles Francis Tyrwhitt Drake, who he would collaborate with on the book Unexplored Syria. And at this time in history, Damascus was the epicenter of religious tensions between the Christians, Jews, and Muslims. In fact, Richard just barely escaped an attack by armed horsemen that the Turkish governor of Syria had sent to kill him.
Yeah.
After struggling for years to maintain peace in the region, he was recalled back to England in 1871, due in part to his Roman Catholic wife's attempts at converting the locals to Catholicism.
Read the room.
Read the room, Isabel.
Yeah.
Girl,
Girl, no.
not the right time or place.
They don't need Mary there right now,
No.
Miss Ma'am. They don't want to know about her. So sorry.
The following year, he was sent to Trieste in Austria-Hungary, where life was able to kind of slow down enough that he was able to write.
Yeah. She can find a book club there, a
Yeah.
religious book club there.
And over the course of 22 years, Richard and Isabel traveled all over the world, including places like Iceland and Paraguay.
Nice.
Richard is known for writing and translating a number of books during this period in his life over the course of the next 2 decades, publishing close to 80 volumes of work, 39 of which were tales of his travels and explorations. His trip to West Africa alone provided him enough material for 5 books, including graphic descriptions of tribal rituals around birth, marriage, and death, as well as ritualistic murder, fetishism, cannibalism, and bizarre sexual practices.
Bizarre to them. I just picture one of those books just being about penises.
Probably. Penises of the world. An illustrated work.
Look at this one. Look at that one. Look at this one. Look at that one.
Look at this one. Are you kidding me?
Look at this one. Look at this one. Just kidding. That's my dick and brown face.
Richard also wrote books about more benign subjects, such as falconry and fencing. Some of the most famous works that he translated include 1001 Arabian Nights, which was released in 1885.
Really?
The Kama Sutra, which he released in 1883. And a Hindu collection of tales titled Vikram and the Vampire, and many others. Isabel translated a version of Arabian Nights that was more appropriate for quote-unquote household reading. So she kind of took all the spicy bits out of it.
Oh, that's no fun.
So you could read it to your kids. Given the salacious nature of many of the books he translated, Richard co-founded the Kama Shastra Society in order to print and circulate the books that were deemed too pornographic to publish, because it was illegal at this time.
Yeah.
He was also the co-founder of the Anthropological Society of London with James Hunt, which would be lambasted for being pro-slavery, as it should have been. Slavery is bad.
Let's just not do that, guys.
Don't do it. I said good day.
It's just not.
On February 5th, 1885, Queen Victoria bestowed upon Richard the honor of the Knight Commander of St. Michael and St. George for his service to England as an explorer. I'm sure it had nothing to do with his saucy novels.
No, or the fact that he named a lake after her. He was like, hey, this is where the Nile starts. I'm going to name it after you.
Hey, girl. I'm going to name this lake after you.
Hey, Queenie, love you, girl. This is your lake now.
Richard passed away on October 20th, 1890 at the age of 69 while in Trieste after his body finally gave out after sustaining years of viral, bacterial, and venereal diseases after he passed from a heart attack.
I love that he died at 69 with all of his, because he was so scandalous, and his body just gave up. at 69. It was like,
It was like,
please be done. Please.
bro, we can't anymore.
I can't take another bout of the clap, my friend. We're done. We're out of here.
Over the course of his adventures, he had contracted cholera, malaria, and yellow fever, just to name a few.
What an immune system.
Right? In his obituary, the New York Times described him as, quote, one of the most remarkable men of his time, end quote. Isabel was fiercely intelligent, and upon Richard's passing, wrote a biography about his life. She is best known for destroying many of his papers, diaries, and journals, including his newest translation of The Perfumed Garden, which was a collection of Arabic sexual practices. So he had previously published a version, but he had put together a new translation that had like a lot of annotations and things regarding some of his research that he had done.
Okay, so kind of like backing up the practices or like
Yep.
explaining
Yep.
why they said this prose.
Yep. Even though she was offered £6,000 for the manuscript, or £647,000 today, she refused on the grounds that of 1,000 people who would read it, 15 would likely do so for scientific reasons, while the other 985 would do so just for the pure filth of it. So it's like...
The Catholicism of it all, ma'am.
Right. Like she was like, I appreciate that you are so into like studying these things and like writing this stuff down and documenting all this stuff, but this is just
gross
pornography and I don't get it.
Yeah. She's like, this was gross and I don't like it.
In her own words, she was quoted as saying, and this is a very long quote, but I wanted to include the whole thing because I feel like it gives a good glimpse of her character and her version of her husband.
Okay.
Quote, my husband had been collecting for 14 years information and materials on a certain subject. His last volume of The Supplemental Nights had been finished and out on November 13th, 1888. He then gave himself up entirely to the writing of this book, which was called The Scented Garden, a translation from the Arabic. It treated of a certain passion. Do not let anyone suppose for a moment that Richard Burton ever wrote a thing from the impure point of view. He dissected a passion from every point of view, as a doctor may dissect a body, showing its source, its origin, its evil and its good, and its proper uses, as designed by Providence and nature, as the great academician Watts paints them. Sure. In private life, he was the most pure, the most refined and modest man that ever lived, and he was so guileless himself that he could never be brought to believe that other men said or used these things from any other standpoint.
Oh, of course. He can't imagine.
I, as a woman, think differently. The day before he died, he called me into his room and showed me half a page of Arabic manuscript upon which he was working, and he said, tomorrow I shall have finished this, and I promise you after this, I will never write another book upon this subject. I will take to our biography. I told him it would be a happy day when he left off that subject, and that the only thing that reconciled me to it was that the doctors had said that it was so fortunate with his partial loss of health that he could find something to interest and occupy his days.
Let the dog have his bone.
Yep.
That's what they were telling her.
He said, this is to be your jointure, and the proceeds are to be set apart for an annuity for you. And I said, I hope not. I hope you will live to spend it like the other. He said, I am afraid it will make a great row in England, because the Arabian Nights was a baby tale in comparison to this, and I am in communication with several men in England about it.
She didn't want his legacy to be a scandal.
She didn't want it to be like he just wrote a bunch of smut.
I can see why she did it now.
Yep.
She didn't want his last words to be of that nature. She wanted him to be known for all of his other research.
The next morning at 6 a.m., he had ceased to exist. Some days later, when I locked myself up in his rooms and sorted and examined the manuscripts, I read this one. No promise had been exacted from me, because the end had been so unforeseen, and I remained for 3 days in a state of perfect torture as to what I ought to do about it.
Yeah, I bet.
During that time, I received an offer from a man whose name shall be always kept private, of 6,000 guineas for it. He said, I know from 1,500 to 2,000 men who will buy it at 4 guineas, i.e., at 2 guineas the volume, and as I shall not restrict myself to numbers, but supply all applicants on payment, I shall probably make £20,000 out of it, which would have been an insane amount of money back then.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And that's when her quote came out, when she said, I said to myself, out of 1,500 men, 15 will probably read it in the spirit of science in which it was written. The other 1,485 will read it for filth's sake and pass it to their friends, and the harm done may be incalculable. Bury it, said one adviser. Don't decide. That means digging it up again and reproducing at will. Get a man to do it for you, said number 2. Don't appear in it. I have got that, I said. I can take in the world, but I cannot deceive God Almighty, who holds my husband's soul in his hands. I tested one man who was very earnest about it. Let us go and consult so-and-so. But he, with a little shriek of horror, said, Oh, pray, don't let me have anything to do with it. Don't let my name get mixed up in it. But it is a beautiful book, I know.
Yeah, so she was on the right path. Like if she
Yeah,
wants her husband to be known for the explorer that he is, his last bit of work can't be that. Because it sounds like it would have been salacious and crazy and devastating, and that would have been his legacy.
yep, as like a pervert, essentially.
Right. And as a God-fearing Roman Catholic woman
Mm-hmm.
whose husband just died,
Yep.
yeah, she would believe that God would throw her husband to the pits of hell from what she did. So, yeah, I bet she really was agonizing over it.
And it's saying something if he had already come out with the Kama Sutra and he had already come out with
Mm.
Arabian Nights, and this was worse than those as far as like how inappropriate it was.
His other people didn't want their own names on it,
Yeah, that's saying a
but
lot.
he was dead, so it was okay.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. She continues, I sat down on the floor before the fire at dark to consult my own heart, my own head. How I wanted a brother. My head told me that sin is the only rolling stone that gathers moss. That what a gentleman, a scholar, a man of the world may write when living, he would see very differently to what the poor soul would see standing naked before its God, with its good or evil deeds alone to answer for, and their consequences visible to it for the first moment, rolling on to the end of time. Oh, for a friend on earth to stop and check them. What would he care for the applause of 1,500 men now, for the whole world's praise and God offended? My heart said, You can have 6,000 guineas. Your husband worked for you, kept you in a happy home with honor and respect for 30 years. How are you going to reward him? That your wretched body may be fed and clothed and warmed for a few miserable months or years? Will you let that soul, which is part of your soul, be left out in cold and darkness till the end of time, till all those sins which may have been committed on account of reading those writings have been expiated or passed away, perhaps for forever? Why, it would be just parallel with the original 30 pieces of silver. I fetched the manuscript and laid it on the ground before me, 2 large volumes worth. Still my thoughts were, was it a sacrilege? It was his magnum opus, his last work that he was so proud of, that was to have been finished on the awful morrow, that never came. Will he rise up in his grave and curse me or bless me? The thought will haunt me to death. But Sadi and Sheikh el Nafsawi, who were pagans, begged pardon of God and prayed not to be cast into hellfire for having written them, and implored their friends to pray for them to the Lord, that he would have mercy on them. And then I said, not only not for 6,000 guineas, but not for 6,000,000 guineas will I risk it. Sorrowfully, reverently, and in fear and trembling, I burnt sheet after sheet until the whole of the volumes were consumed. End quote.
I respect her a lot more now, knowing the
Yeah.
details of it, how she really just agonized over it. And even in the end, when she chose not to share it, she lovingly burnt it
Mm-hmm.
piece by piece. She didn't
Yep.
just like
Toss
throw
it
it to the
in there.
fire to be done with it. She still tried to honor what he did
Mm-hmm.
in her own way.
Isabel passed away 6 years later on March 22nd, 1896, at the age of 65 from cancer. The couple are buried at St. Mary Magdalene Churchyard in Mortlake, Surrey. The Burton Mausoleum, in which the couple are interred, is unique, as it is, quote, shaped like a tent the couple had designed for expeditions into the Syrian desert. The cloth has been beautifully carved from sandstone to look like it ripples in the breeze. A scalloped pelmet that runs around the building is decorated with the reversed Islamic star and crescent motif embossed with gold. At the very top of the tent is a gold leaf-coated Star of Bethlehem. Inside are a collection of lanterns from Syria. Camel bells have been strung from the ceiling and would have jingled when the door opened, end quote.
That's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that even with her own kind of religious viewpoints too, they put so much respect on what they learned and what their travels were,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, the Islamic faith, being respectful of them and allowing them to put such a symbol in a Catholic cemetery, that's a big deal too.
Yep. A plaque in the shape of a Bible on the outside of the mausoleum reads as follows, quote, Captain Sir Richard Francis Burton, KCMG, FRGS, born 19th March 1821, died at Trieste 20 October 1890, RIP. Isabel, his wife, née Arundel of Wardour, died 22nd day of March 1896, RIP. Jesus, Mercy, Mary, help pray for her, end quote. And there is another little plaque that's below that reads as follows. And this is a quote from one of his friends.
Okay.
Quote, Richard Burton, farewell, dear friend, dead hero. The great life is ended, the great perils, the great joys, and he to whom adventures were as toys, who seemed to bear a charm against spear or knife or bullet, now lies silent from all strife out yonder, where the Austrian eagles poise on Istrian hills. But England, at the noise of that dread fall, weeps with the hero's wife. O last and noblest of the errant knights, the English soldier and the Arab sheik, O singer of the East, who loved so well the deathless wonder of the Arabian Nights, who touched Camoens' lute and still would seek ever new deeds until the end. Farewell. Justin Huntley McCarthy, end quote.
I like it.
And that's the life and story of Sir Richard Francis Burton.
I feel like if you really kind of break it down, you could probably talk about this man for months and months and months and months
Yep.
based on like what he did, the morality of it.
Mm-hmm.
Was he respectful? Was he not? What did we learn? That kind of thing.
Yep.
But from the sounds of it, he started pretty ishy,
Mm-hmm.
but he ended the way it should be done. Who as a person over time instead of continually making the same kind of pseudo shitty ways of finding out information.
Yep.
Whether it was a necessary evil or not.
Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest quote unquote taboo about his life is not the nature of his adventures and his explorations of these areas of the world that were so foreign to Victorian Englanders, but more the sexual nature of other cultures and other peoples. That was such a foreign and shocking thing to the repressed Victorians of the time, even though we now know the Victorians were just as weird as everybody else, but they just didn't show it.
Yeah, they just made it worse for us later.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of one of the things that people want to shame him for is like, oh, he was a pervert. He was translating all these things that were so dirty. It's like, no, he was bringing to the world these stories that wouldn't have been
Of
brought
yeah,
for.
just general stories of affection and connection and human interaction.
And who knows how long it would have taken for those stories to make their way to English-speaking countries had he not done it
Yeah,
himself.
right. And at what light too, because he could have done what so many before him did, where they were just these savage people and they had such crazy, insane stuff. And they did all these awful, weird things. And it's like, no, they're just people existing
Mm-hmm.
in their area of the world,
Yep.
making it work.
We'd love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
Hi guys, I'm Courtney.
And I'm Lisa.
And we are the hosts of The Book of the Dead, a true crime podcast based out of New Jersey, where we tell you about the most obscure cases that you may have never heard of. So join us in the Book of the Dead library for another chapter of The Book of the Dead wherever you get your podcasts. Bye guys.
This week's podcast plug is the Book of the Dead podcast, a weekly true crime podcast hosted by the mother-daughter duo of Courtney and Lisa. It strives to be the voice of those who can no longer speak for themselves. The inspiration behind the Book of the Dead is to shed light on cases and victims that have gone more or less unnoticed by the media and in other podcasts, instead of focusing on more famous or sensationalized cases. The Book of the Dead does what it can to put focus on the ones that are more obscure. Tune in every Sunday for a new case and join them on a journey to get justice for those that have been waiting far too long for it. They're part of the Darkcast Network, and we will have a link to their show in the show notes.
Nice.
If you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, CastBox, Podcast Addict, and or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
This week's listener question comes from Carrie Ann, and she would like to know, what is one accident you have had that is memorable?
Oh my God, which one? The one where I cracked my forehead, the one where we attempted to walk on water.
But you weren't injured in that one.
No, we could have been though.
Do the forehead one.
Okay. So, God, how old was I? 3? 4?
I'm
Young.
going to say like 4.
Yeah, and it was right before my bedtime in the summer, and Dad was mowing the lawn, and Mom was washing dishes, and you and I were playing hide and seek, and you were counting, and I got really excited, and so I ran to go hide in your room, but me, being the graceful, angelic human being that I was. So I was like in my nighttime attire, I had one of our very well worn and well loved Care Bear nightgowns on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was barreling down to your room, and I didn't turn the corner fast enough to get into your doorway. And right at the end of the hall was a closet with a lock on the doorknob on the outside. And this was an old house. So the lock, the little piece that was
Metal
protruding
plate.
out, was sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And I hit it head on, like almost dead center in my skull.
Mm-hmm.
And I split the skin like perfectly in the shape of that lock. And I got really dazed. I remember like hitting it really hard because I was running fast. And then I kind of stumbled back and tried to figure out what happened. And so then I turned around to the landing of the stairs to cry or do something because like I knew that I hurt myself, but I was too stunned to figure it out. And what did you see? What was your
So I heard you giggling, and then I heard a loud thump, and then the sound of you like falling on your butt, and then I heard crying. And you were very clumsy, and you would like cry all the time. So I was just like,
We're 6 years apart, just so you know.
yeah. So I
So
was,
like the difference is pretty stark.
so you would go up a set of stairs, there'd be a landing, and then you would go up the second set of stairs, and there'd be a landing there with, access to bedroom, a
3 rooms.
closet, another bedroom, and the bathroom. And there was like a half wall on the top landing, so you couldn't see into the one bedroom where she had knocked her head.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm walking up the stairs. I get to the one landing, and I'm like, oh, what happened? Did you trip and hit your knee, or whatever? And then I round the second landing, and she's sitting on her butt with like her legs kind of sprawled out in front of her in this like purple Care Bear nightgown. And there is blood just gushing out of her forehead, like just everywhere. It looked like Carrie just like coming out of her face. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh shit. Like I didn't say that, but I was like, oh my
Right.
God. So I yell downstairs to our mom. I'm like, Mom, Maddie is bleeding really bad. You need to get up here. And so she comes flying up the stairs, and she's like, go get your dad, because he was mowing the yard. So then I run
Yeah.
outside and like run up behind him, and I'm like, Dad, Maddie's bleeding really bad. We gotta go.
I think Mom, if she recalls it, she heard you screaming, Maddie's dying, Maddie's dying, you have to come.
I said you were bleeding.
The next thing I remember was Mom had scooped me up and taken me to the sink to run my head through the water to try to figure out where the cut was because there was so much blood on my face at that point that she didn't even know what was hit.
Yeah.
She couldn't find the source of bleeding.
Yeah.
So Dad rushes in and Mom has a washcloth. She finds the spot. And the nearest hospital is like what? It was like 20 minutes
Like 30-minute drive.
away. Yeah. So Dad's driving, you're in the passenger seat, and was it Mom in the back?
Driving.
Mom was driving.
Dad was holding the washcloth to your forehead in the back seat.
Yep. And we went to the hospital, and there was, funnily enough, a plastic surgeon just there in the ER that night, and he stitched up my forehead, and I remember it was like a bright colored stitch.
It was
Like,
blue.
was it bright? Yeah, bright blue.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me like I think it had like a pink Band-Aid or something on it. Like it was a pretty Band-Aid that they put on it too. But I remember the doctor was trying to comfort me by complimenting the color of the stitches and how nice, how pretty the stitches looked in the middle of my forehead. And I still have that scar to this day on my hairline. And we had to throw away that Care Bear nightgown, and you were mad at me.
I think I was just mad that you got hurt. And I don't even remember what game we were playing, but we were playing some game we saw in like Lamb Chop and Friends. So I blame Lamb Chop. Fucking puppet. Just kidding.
We did some stupid stuff as kids.
Yeah, we did some stupid shit.
We're here. How about you? What's one accident you want to recite?
God, I've been in a lot of accidents. One that appeals to my clumsy nature is, I can't remember what year of school it was. It might have been my freshman year of high school. It was like the day of school pictures, and we lived really close to home. Like we lived really close to the school, so it was like within walking distance. And I was walking home, and it was icy out. I don't know why it was icy out, but I wasn't wearing a coat. I was wearing like a 3/4 sleeve shirt, and I had my hair in those stupid little like butterfly clips, like the twist things.
That are like super in vogue right now.
Yeah, they're back now. God damn it. And I was wearing these like platform, I think they were platform like slip-on shoes, like thong sandals or something.
Yeah, you had sneaker ones too.
Yeah, so it was some sort of platform shoe. I don't remember if it was like sandal or what, but I was wearing these platform shoes and this long black skirt. So I couldn't I couldn't like do my normal walk. So I was like kind of penguin walking home, and I hit this patch of ice, and I went to catch myself, and I landed on both of my hands behind me,
Oh,
and
wow.
immediately I could tell something had happened because both my arms just ached. Like it hurt
Hmm.
so bad that like I struggled to get up because I didn't want to have to use my hands. And so I got up, and it wasn't so much that I like scraped them up or anything, but it was just I could tell something bad had happened and it hurt. So I
Hmm.
like was holding them up to my neck and just like sobbing like all the way back home. And I got home, and I think we ended up going to, what did we call it?
Death Valley.
Yeah, Death Valley
Yeah.
Hospital, because it wasn't a very good hospital.
They
But I
misdiagnosed
digress.
a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they
digress.
weren't great.
I had 2 hairline fractures in my wrists from falling on them. And
That's so
so,
crazy.
yeah, I had fractured both my wrists falling, and it was like after that that I got carpal tunnel in the right hand, and
Hmm.
I got tendonitis in the left hand. So words
Yeah,
wise,
it was a really, really steep hill to our house. It was like a big hill, and then
that
I
isn't even
know.
where I fell. I fell at the base of the hill. So I had to walk
Wow,
up this steep ass
that's
hill
awful.
after falling on my wrists, and like, yeah,
It
it
was
was not.
cold and
I think I walked in the grass primarily just so I wouldn't
probably.
slip on the sidewalk again. I was probably just walking through people's yards. But yeah, that's probably one of my more memorable accidents, is fracturing both my wrists by falling on my ass. All right. What's something good you'd like to share?
Oh man, something good. I actually just connected with somebody we both know to learn a little bit more about cannabis in general, because I've been able to get a lot of kind of digestive relief and like stomach pain relief and GERD relief from edibles, but I also don't want to be high all the time.
Mm,
But I also really love the benefit of not having just agonizing stomach cramps. So I reached out to her because she's starting her own kind of consulting firm regarding cannabis locally, and we're going to meet up, and we're going to talk about kind of what I'm looking for, and she's going to give like book recommendations and different kind of ways to research and learn about the best forms and strains for me to get the relief
nice.
I need. So
Nice.
now that, cannabis is legal recreationally in Minnesota, I feel like now I can kind of experiment and see what benefits it has for me with like my chronic illness and chronic pain. So I've had some major, major stomach and digestive issues for like the last 5 years. And I've been to a gastroenterologist twice. We've done all these tests, and there's nothing like I don't have celiac. I don't have the stomach paralysis that diabetics develop yet,
Hmm.
but I might be getting it. It might be happening, I think. So instead of being on, just insane doses of pantoprazole and Prevacid and all Tums and stuff, I can have something else that's a little more natural and hopefully not get too used to it as quickly as my body did with the medications. So
Hmm.
I'm excited to learn more. But we connected today, and that was something very good. What about you?
Last week was Girl Scout camp, which
Mhm.
was an interesting experience this year. We'll just say that. And I'm proud of myself because, other than one night, I did stick with my yoga practice. There was one night that I had to miss it, mainly because my youngest was doing the sleepover and she had forgotten
Mhm.
something. So I was literally at yoga, and I was getting ready to go into the building to do yoga when I got the call. and Thomas was not home because he was with our oldest at her ski patrol class, so he couldn't do it. So I was like, all right, I guess I am going to go home and get this for her, because by the time I would have been done with yoga, it would have been too late to drop stuff off for her.
Yeah. Well, and sleepovers are such a big deal. Like, it's such a big experience that, like, if they ask for your help and you don't come right away, it becomes a core memory.
Yeah, and I had to rush to get there because it took me a while to get there. But anyway, I dropped off what she needed and it was fine. All right, shall we?
Let's do it.
Want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at Ye Olde Crime Pod, or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Madison.
And we'll see you next time with another tale
As old as crime.